My name's Ron Kitchen. My father, John Kitchen, was minister of the Perth North Church, and we used to live at 127 Glasgow Road in the North Church Manse. I well remember every Monday morning, because Mondays were the day when ministers presumably didn't work, and they had a day of rest after the sermons and all the rush of a Sunday. And one of the visitors was always Mr. Soutar Sr., who came, this large, full of life gentleman with a large white moustache and white hair, always dressed incredibly smartly in a suit with a tie and the detachable studded collar, who would come into the house, and he would sit with my father for an hour or two, possibly talking about the world. And I remember my father had such a high regard for him. I remember going to his workshop up the old High Street, in the back up a little close, and then up some stone stairs into his workshop, which was a joiner's workshop, but I think it was also an undertaker's, but I'm not certain about that, where he was very much respected craftsman, still smartly dressed there, but with a brown overall coat on. And he would manufacture these wonderful, wonderful pieces of furniture out of everything that was there, everything dovetailed beautifully. And I remember looking at these and thinking, how on earth did he manage to make these little dovetails without knocking them off with his chisel? I remember going to the house regularly, and the lady, who I believe now was the housekeeper, would come and bring us tea and me some orange juice, and I would sit there for ages while they spoke as well. Don't remember terribly much after that, apart from one occasion when my father was recounting an accident that Mr. Soutar had just had. He'd bought a new car, which I seem to recall was one of the first automatics, and I'm pretty sure it was the Wolsey. And he had gone out to the garage and probably put it in reverse at the wrong time and gone straight through his garage doors, much to his annoyance and my father's slight amusement, I dare say. But he was a lovely, lovely gentleman, and I know when he died that he left my father the 4 bookcases, which were always referred to as Willie Soutar's bookcases. And they took pride of place in my father's office in 127 Glasgow Road. When my father died, he left 2 of these bookcases to myself and 2 to my sister. I remember the first thought I had about them and the Soutar Foundation was reading in the Scots magazine. And it was an article there about the Soutar House, which by this time I think had become a museum, or they were thinking of making it a museum. And they spoke about the bookcases and wondered about their whereabouts. And at that time I had this little prick of conscience and thought one day they should return. But I lived in a large house, farmhouse at this stage, and all the bookcases were in my dining room in there and in full use. But about 15 years ago, 16, 17 years ago, when I retired, I moved to a much smaller house, and I recall that I didn't quite have the same amount of room and made contact at that stage. The seed was sown in my mind about the possibility of returning the bookcase. Them there myself and build them up and really look at the house again and get great memories of what had happened in the past.
So you saw the bookcases back in the house?
Yep. We loaded them individually, and each one linked into each individual other one, and they had chalk marks on the back and Roman numerals cut out on each bookcase, so as each one knew how to fit into the next one, because the dovetails weren't manufactured on a great big machine. They were all individually carved, so each little bit only fitted the one that it was meant to fit onto above.
So it would have brought back your impression as a child of the workmanship,
absolutely,
the craftsmanship.
Absolutely. And that's why it was so live in me today.
That's fantastic, fantastic. And they're in the room where Soutar had originally been.
It was so nice seeing it.
They're full of Soutar's books now.
Yeah, that's lovely.
That's great.
So it's wonderful that they're able to go back there, and my childhood memories have taken a full circle there and able to leave them there as well.
Yes.
So lovely.
Yes. How old were you when you have these memories of Mr. Soutar seeing you visiting? How old were you?
Well, my gut to begin with is probably about 5 or 6. My father was minister in Drumchapel, where I was born, and taken to Perth when I was around 2. So I would have seen him from, and I suppose memories start at 4, 5, 6, something like that. So that'd be roughly 6, 7, 8 at these sort of ages.
So you'd be a small size.
Absolutely.
So the impression you have of Mr. Soutar is this tall, imposing character.
Very much so.
Yes.
Very much so.
But did he ever, was he friendly to small people? Do you remember him talking to you, or was the conversation really between the adults?
I don't honestly have, I certainly have no fear of the gentleman. He was almost that lovely Santa Claus feel about him, because he was charming and delightful.
Lovely.
He was lovely.
Yeah.
But I don't have any other real memories of it, apart from there was certainly no fear, as you would expect at that age, of a great big imposing gentleman. It was always, I'm going to the house. There was a pleasure in it.
Do you remember conversations between your father and Mr. Soutar about Willie Soutar, the poet?
I remember more conversations with my father telling me about the poet, telling me about the illness, telling me about the greatness of him. I think I remember the jovial talks from Mr. Soutar, and laughing about some of the things his son had done in his earlier days. But I'm not 100% certain whether I remember that, because I've heard of it later and read more of it. But I certainly remember a jovial occasion when they were there.
Right, interesting.
It's so surprising to me that more people don't know really about Willie Soutar, when there's so much publicity given to Rabbie Burns, and Willie Soutar is very much in there as number 2.
Yes. The poetry, some of the poetry is in English and some of it is in Scots language. And I'm wondering if your memories of listening to the conversations as a child, if you ever remember Scots words being used by Mr. Soutar Senior.
No, cannot say I do at all. And it may be that they weren't, because I don't think my father would have spoken in the Scots either.
Yes.
And I don't think the understanding would have been there so much.